special edition of the American Music Show. We are going to have a special show today all about, well, my favorite media, radio. And I would like to introduce everybody. To my immediate left, we have Vicki Powers and Steve Powers from the Ring Bell and Lulu Show. You guys are internet radio.
That's correct.
That's right.
All right, so far end of the table, veteran disc jockey, as they used to call them those days, radio personality now, Mr. Bill Mayhew from WMAL Radio. And I tell you, I bought many a record on my way home from a gig the next day by listening to his show.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then to my far right, we have Bill Wax. And Bill Wax, you're from XM.
Yes, I am.
Satellite radio. And to my very near right, Mr. Steve Hoffman. And Steve is from WPFW. And you've been producing and hosting programs and community radio since 1971? That's a long time. Long time in the business. And you're currently doing a Wednesday edition of Don't Forget Me Blues on WPFW, right?
That's correct.
And it says you also own and operate mobile DJ business. So that means you do
Weddings, special
weddings,
events, that kind of
weddings,
DJ
and,
work.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. You know, we're going to begin the questioning all the way across the table with Bill.
Did I lose something?
No, you won. Actually, you won. You won the biggest thing, the biggest accolade I can imagine in this business, and that is absolutely hundreds of thousands of fans over the air.
I was blessed.
Yes, you
I really
certainly
was.
were. And I don't know, you made a lot of musicians hungry on the way home just talking about the Amphora restaurant. I'll tell you that right now.
The M4 and the dancing crab.
The dancing
I
crab.
talked about the dancing crab.
Yes, on Wisconsin Avenue, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it still is.
Yeah,
isn't
right
it?
up around the corner from TOP Radio and
Yes.
TV. Yeah. I had a good time, Billy. Couldn't have been any better.
Now, you started on WFAX.
I did in 1949. I worked for a man named Lamar Newcomb who could not pay me any money. And I don't know whether I told you or not, but he said, I can't pay you, but if you want to go sell time, you can get the commission on the sale. And in 3 months, being the great salesman I was in 49, I sold one account. And my commission was $7 a month. I thought that'd make you sneeze. And anyhow, he paid me $7 a month. And I stayed with him for 3 months and then walked into WGAY on the day they had fired someone. And a man named John Kluge hired me at WGAY. And for the next year and a half, Mr. Newcomb, Lamar Newcomb, would pay me my $7 a month until Alcorn Motors canceled its contract. And I
What
stopped.
was the name of the motor company?
Alcorn Motors. Alcorn in Falls Church. I'll never forget it because it was the first money I'd made in radio. You know, it's a big deal. I was playing drums for a living, so the radio thing was just a challenge.
And you still play drums sometimes.
Badly, but I do play, yes. Yeah. I had a good music career, Billy, I really did. I played with the best players in town, and I didn't drag them down. They brought me up to their talent. And I learned a lot. I studied drums for 11 years with a man named Ray Delphi who played drums in the pit band at the Capitol Theater. And
Was that on F or G
on F Street, yeah.
F Street.
And one day when I was taking a lesson, a gentleman knocked on the door. There was a little tiny glass, and he was looking through, and he knocked on the door like that. And Mr. Delphi said, open the door. And I did, and the gentleman said, Mr. Delphi, I wonder if you could help me. And Ray said, well, I'll certainly try. He said, my name is Louis Belson. And he
Wow.
and he came in, I stood up, he came in, sat down where I'd been, and he said, I want to make my closed roll work properly. And Ray said, well, on this little rubber pad. He said, roll for me. And it was perfect. If you make a perfect closed roll, it's like turning on a faucet very quickly, where it goes shh, and all you do is you hear the shh. You don't hear sticks doing anything.
Yeah.
And Mr. Duffy said, young man, I can't teach you anything. And Belson got up and walked out, and that was it. But that was a great memory for me, and Louis and I had stayed friends over the years. He remembered that.
For the folks out watching the show, the difference between a closed and an open roll is like an open roll, you can actually see the sticks go up. That
Right.
as you close it,
Yeah.
you're getting actually closer into the snare, and the roll becomes like a buzz.
Right.
That's called
Yeah.
a
You put more
closed.
pressure on the stick.
Right.
With that finger on your right hand and with your thumb on the left hand. And it goes from brrr to whoosh. Not easy to do, but once you learn it, you never forget it.
Some people call it a press roll.
Yes, absolutely. You a drummer?
Well, I've had to play with them now for almost 50 years.
Okay.
You're down to pick up a little bit, huh?
Yeah, you got to pick up something. Bill Wax, what he just said, he's a drummer, and that's, I was thinking about how many, not so much these days, but how many, especially the old blues musicians, that I read on either the backs of album covers or in those little CD booklets that started off as DJs. I can name a couple of them, B.B. King for one, and another one, Rufus Thomas.
Sonny Boy Williamson.
Sonny Boy
was
Williamson
really
did
the
as well.
first that was really the one that sort of opens the door for all of them. And really what it was about was they got on the radio because they could announce their gigs. And so it was a way to advertise their shows. Now, whether it was a flour company or whatever, that, or Pepticon, which was B.B. King's person that underwrote, like you were talking about. But the idea was they would get on, they'd play a number or two, and then they would tell people, well, I'm going to be at Aunt May's Jute Joint on Friday night. And so all the folks would come down, and Aunt May would give him a little money because he announced it on the radio. He'd get a little money for being on the radio, and then he'd get a little more money for playing the gig. And at the end of the night, he might even be able to afford the room that night. And so that's sort of the way it went.
And what I'm even more floored by is these guys' age when they did it. This is, so-and-so was 14 years old when he, 14 on radio.
I don't know whether any of those guys, I mean, the guys we just mentioned, Sonny Boy, Rufus may have started that young, but I don't think Sonny Boy, B was at least early 20s by the time he gets to Memphis, and that's when he starts. And Sonny Boy had already been on the radio. All of them heard Sonny Boy. It was Sonny Boy. And Sonny Payne, if we're talking about radio people, Sonny Payne is still on the radio today on the King Biscuit Hour, or King Biscuit Show, and he still is there every day, does his 15 minutes, and has been doing it now for 50, 60 years.
KFFA, Helena, Arkansas.
How
Now-
did you spell Payne?
Payne.
Yeah. There was a great, great drummer with the Basie band named Sonny Payne.
Right, this is different. It's not the same.
Okay.
Yes. Well, that guy's dead, Sonny Payne.
Yeah, my Sonny Payne's dead.
Yes, he is.
Yeah,
Yes.
drummer.
But the other Sonny Payne is not. He's still on there, and he still does his show. And people go down, and the amazing thing about Sonny Payne is whoever walks into that studio, whether you're a musician or you're just a fan to walk in, Sonny Payne just opens the mic, has you sit right down there, and he talks to you for a couple of minutes on the radio for everyone. And he's just as friendly and as warm, as nice as he can be.
Now, we're talking about age in radio now. And I'm sitting here looking at Steve Hoffman and his credentials. 1971, Steve? You must have been damn young.
Well, my work in radio has been exclusively the sort of community radio, college radio, public, nonprofit, and so on. And so that was back in my college days. I
Those
happened
were
to
your
go to a
that was college radio.
And back then, and that's one thing about radio now that's is sadly different from the way it was in the 60s and 70s, is that back in those days, the 60s and 70s, college radio was a real wide open arena for all sorts of creative, and in many cases probably, to be honest about it, lousy, but creative, quirky radio. And so that's how someone like me started.
I loved college radio.
Right. And it just, there's still some of that out there. There are still some of those quirky, totally student-driven stations out there, but over the years, there's less of them. More of the college stations were trying to either sound professional or they're just operated, they're licensed to the college, but they're, part of National Public Radio or some other more professional operation. But back in the day, you could have people like me who literally didn't know what they were doing, broadcasting to the actual public. All we had to do was take some tests, an FCC third-class license, and went down to, in my case, the Cincinnati Post Office, federal office building, and took some tests that you studied for an hour.
Yeah.
And you were qualified to actually broadcast to the public.
Okay, did that same license make you qualified to engineer as well?
Yeah, well, for the
No.
basic engineering.
No, it did not. You had to get a first-class license to be an engineer. You get a third-class license to be a jock. And at least that's what.
that's what I remember.
We signed the engineering lodge, though, for the show, right? We weren't these, right? It wasn't that kind of engineer, but the reason you had to get a license was that, in other words, the person with the third-class license, and it had to be displayed in the studio. I remember radio stations, they would have the wall would be papered with these things, the actual license, because if you were the only one in, kind of in charge for that hour, you had to have the third-class license. Honestly, I'm not even sure how it works now. I don't think it
Or no,
it matters
there are
anymore,
none,
does it?
right.
It's long gone. There's
Right.
none of that at all.
And from the public's point of view,
Engineers.
frankly, it doesn't matter a great
Right.
deal. It's kind of an inside baseball sort of thing. It doesn't matter that much to the
Yeah,
public.
because I used to remember walking into radio stations. I've walked into many a radio station, and I could tell who had what license. For instance, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a DJ cued his own stuff and did his own work, he was not only a radio personality, but he had a first-class engineering license.
I don't remember
No, I
that,
think the
Billy.
third class,
Third class maybe, but not first class.
not first.
First class were the engineers. I mean, the
The
actual.
real
Oh,
engineers.
that
yeah.
was okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
I
to do what
see.
you're
Yeah,
doing,
so-
that was this third-class engineer. Again, it was a very low-level thing, or third-class, whatever, not engineer. But you were able to engineer your own show in the sense of you were pressing the buttons, you were doing the readings off the antenna. If there was anything beyond that that needed to be done,
How about the
you
queuing?
couldn't
You
do
know,
it.
when they
yeah,
had
the
actual,
queuing, right?
yeah.
You would do
But
it.
when Bill started,
Yeah.
there were
Right.
engineers that were doing all that. Bill would
yeah.
do his bit, and he'd cue
Yes.
the engineer to start the music. Right? Am I
Yeah,
right?
I never touched a turntable for many, many, many years.
Right.
Many years. And we had an engineer at WFAX, and then we had him at WGAY and PIK and OL and MAL. Yeah, I loved engineers.
And you had to synchronize, I guess, with these guys and
Well,
try to.
they pretty much
some rapport.
knew what you were going to do.
They did it the same way we were doing it here. Just the way you just saw it just a few minutes ago when we opened it up.
You're on.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
It's not, okay, that's still how it's
I'm the
done.
engineer on our side.
There you go.
Okay, now tell me about your career. Now, you're just kind of the new kids on the block
We are.
here at
We
the
are.
table.
We've been a little over a year and a half doing the show.
Uh-huh.
May of 2007, we started webcasting. It's a little bit new type of medium, but we pretty much keep it to local artists, independent artists, because of the way the royalty situation is now. It's only people that own the rights to the music specifically. And we try to promote local artists here in Washington, D.C., Maryland, Northern Virginia area.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's our push.
We like the music. We decide that there's a lot of friends, a lot of people we know don't know about the music that's right here, right under their nose.
Yeah, that's true.
And Vicki sometimes refers to people as music snobs. They'll go pay the $100 at the Verizon Center to see the big boomer
Yeah.
act do the old, but here they got great bands right here in
But
the
I've
city
never heard a lot
You
of
can
those
pay
acts.
$10,
and,
you know.
that they don't even know about. Yeah. So we play and a lot of independent stuff. There's approximately 52 million listeners now that at least log on once a week to internet radio. A lot of the young people now, it's the way they get a lot of their music. We also run a chat room when we do our show, which a lot of internet radio shows do. And it's a little bit different dynamic.
Nice interaction with our listeners.
And we'll get them requesting. Some of the artists will come in to the chat room, so it makes it fun. And of course, the fans of the show like that when the artist comes in and can talk with them in the chat room. A little bit different dynamic there. But the younger people seem to be moving towards it. So the advertisers, of course, the 24 to 54-year-old, they figure about 1 in 7 log in at least once a week.
Is that what you figure the demographic scene is?
Pretty much, yeah. The younger people, of course, are all grown up with the computers, and they got one in the house.
Who's the biggest internet radio personality?
Well, as far as what we're doing in the field of blues music, which is pretty much what we're webcasting, there's a fellow named Tom Meyer who does World of Blues. Vicki has a lot of content.
Okay, so your show is mostly about blues.
Pretty much blues roots, rockabilly music. Yeah,
blues roots, rockabilly.
We try to stay away from the rock and roll per se, the run-of-the-mill type rock music.
We don't play any rap.
We're not playing classical. It's blues, it's roots. We'll play whatever. And a lot of artists will send us music that don't fall into that category.
there's certain people that because their I guess their reputation precedes them that have become internet radio personalities after they were already stars. Steve Van Zandt.
Right.
There you go. Well, Stevie's Garage.
Yeah.
And Bob Dylan's Radio Hour.
Theme Time Radio Hour on XM.
Yes, Theme Time Radio Hour. Mm-hmm. That's real good, by the way.
It is.
That's a great show.
It is a great show.
Yes, that is. He does all kinds of stuff. I never knew that he had such eclectic taste, but I've got a piece of him playing everything from Billie Holiday's "I Hear Music," to some stuff from Ethiopic, which is a series of world music that came out. So he's very well-rounded on his show, isn't he?
We tried to pick a niche there because there's thousands now of internet radio shows, as it grows, and we thought you could get just lost in the shuffle there, so we try to kind of keep it down to a little bit of a niche there, being local artists and being that blues roots type music. There's a lot of great musicians in the Washington, D.C. area, and just trying to get that music out to the public.
And we have access to a lot of the music from these local people, too.
A lot of the artists have been real good to us, supplying us with live music they record at some of the venues that's exclusive to our show that makes it kind of interesting that you have to listen to our show to be able to hear some of this. So we're really appreciative of a lot of the artists that have helped us do that. There's a fellow named Carl Malamar. He pioneered internet radio in 1993, but back then you had to actually download file after file. Mm-hmm. Went until late November '94. They started streaming, and at that point was when we talked earlier about Mark Cuban, who owns Dallas basketball team. Yeah. He had purchased or formed a company with a partner called Broadcast.com, and they went into it in a big way. I think he sold the company to Yahoo, if I'm not mistaken. We talked earlier about that.
The other fellow went on to make cookies.
Oh, did he?
Mr. Malamar.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. So they, but just to show you how when a new medium comes along, I thought it interesting that when Mark Cuban put together Broadcast.com, he was one of the first big ones to go into this internet radio. They went public and they offered the stock, I believe, at like $18 a stock. The day it traded, opened for trading, went at $68 a stock. And this was after they had filed a prospectus with the Security Exchange Commission telling them that they were losing money and expected to lose money indefinitely. But people were still pouring money into this during the dot-com period. It was a new medium everybody wanted in on. But I think the royalty situation for what we do is kind of up in the air.
We'll read about it and try to keep up. But
I think currently if you're $1.2 million or less in revenue, and I don't know why they come up with these figures, but it is what it is. If you have 6,840 listeners, consecutive listeners or less, and your revenue is less than 1.2 million, you're allowed to broadcast if you are always putting out independent artists, music that the record labels don't own.
Yeah, which we stick with.
That was Congress decided that. It was in last May. So who knows what they'll decide again as this thing progresses. I think it's still up in the air, and everybody wants their cut, and everybody deserves their cut.
Should have.
They should have. But I guess it's just a matter of figuring out who gets what and who's entitled to what. And eventually, I think it'll settle down. And there is a fellow I mentioned earlier that does a show, World of Blues, Tom Meyer. He's very ambitious with what he does. He has live DJs around the country and around the world. And his goal is to try to have a different DJ every 2 hours, hand off, around the globe. So if we're sleeping here in this country, the guy that's awake in another country will be broadcasting. He'll keep this thing going 24/7. So I don't know if he's able to do this, but
He hasn't gotten there yet.
he's working on it and very ambitious, and so we look.
We want to hold that thought because, okay, you see that ball is getting bigger as it rolls. Now, Bill, half the stations, or more than half the stations you mentioned, were AM stations, those old AM stations.
Correct.
Well, now, the automobile that I drive has a very sophisticated sound system. It has actually two sound systems, one for the back and one for the front. They're both Alpine, and they both came with it. And so it has surround sound, the vehicle does. And I can turn on AM, and there may be 3 places on the dial I can even get a detection of voice. Because what it is, I figure this, that so few people listen to AM in cars anymore that they're not concentrating on any electronics in that system for AM broadcast. Is there any music stations on AM at all in this area? Do you know of?
Good question. I don't know of any.
I don't know, and I was born and raised here. In
this area, there are very few, but there are AM music stations, especially in the South. And as it turns out, those AM music stations, a lot of them, are playing what is now considered sort of soul blues or contemporary soul blues. The
lot of
East and
Malaco
South.
records.
Well, but it's much bigger than Malaco anymore. I mean, it's not very well known outside of certain markets. But for instance, in Washington, if you listened on Saturdays to WPFW and listened to the Gator, you would hear that same style of blues being featured. But they're sort of these little niches that have grown up, and it's sort of a delivery system for this whole genre of blues, going basically to the African American community down south.
But it's more in the South than it is
Oh no,
anywhere
it's
else.
definitely in the South.
And
Yeah.
Hispanic music is also more likely, I think, to be heard on AM proportionally. But in terms of the sort of rock, pop, country, and those sort of formats, there is very little. It doesn't mean, in my opinion, and again, I don't work in the commercial radio world, but just as someone who's listened to radio all my life and sort of pays attention to it and reads the business pages of the newspapers and so on, keeps up to some extent. AM is definitely very weak right now, but it's not. It's more than non-existent. It still exists. There are people out there, for example, some of those right-wing talk show hosts, most of whom I personally abhor, but that's besides the point, have millions of listeners, and most of them are on AM. So, for example, that's one format that has been, not only has listeners, but has actually impacted the course of history because it impacts politics and so on. All news stations, still many of them are AM. The one in the D.C. area has migrated to FM, the WTOP, but in many cities, in New York, you still have WINS, WCBS, and there's actually a third, the Bloomberg station. So in that market alone, there's 3 AM all-news stations, and then you've got the sports talk format and so on. So there still is a purpose and a function to AM radio, but it's true that music has largely migrated from it.
Every now and then, curiosity will get the best of me, and I'll go to some old frequency that I remembered years ago. Either to find out that I can't get it in, and then I keep, like I said, it's just out of curiosity because I'm not searching for anything in particular, but I'm just curious to find what really is there on that band. And I'll go down there and I won't hear anything. I won't hear anything. And I won't hear anything. And then I'll hit some kind of real loud station and a voice will come out at me and say, "And Jesus said,"
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around. There is also, by the way, the one liberal commercial talk network, the Air America Radio, and some of their stations that are not strictly that, but that's another format. they're not exactly busting giant holes in the Arbitron ratings, but again, they do exist. One of the former talk show hosts from that station is now going to be in the United States Senate. I mean, so, again, it's more than dead. There is something going on there. The one in the D.C. area now has actually been calling itself Obama 1260, sort of to try to piggyback, and that's the old, I guess, WWDC letters.
Yeah.
But it's the Progressive Talk station now.
Let's get back to that Arbitron. Now, that was very, very important to FM radio. I know that, and that's, if you had like a 7 point something share on the Arbitron, then you were like, you were kicking butt, right? Does Arbitron rating does that mean anything to satellite radio?
Yeah, it does. Well, matter of fact, we had hired Arbitron for a few years to do our ratings. We have someone else doing them now, but yeah, it does mean something because our talk channels sell advertising, and advertisers want to know how many listeners you got, and that's how you set your rates. And as long as that's the process, then it does have meaning. You got to be able to prove. You can't just say, "Oh, we got a lot of listeners." That somebody's putting up money. They really want to know what they're getting back for their money. I mean, like anyone should in any kind of business with anything. So, yes, and it has an impact, although I don't think Arbitron has yet moved far enough to really do the kind of ratings, but there are ratings also going along on the internet radio stations. And if I could, Billy, really quick, all of us sitting at the table, those two are the future.
This is the future.
The internet, my belief is the internet radio is the future. It will... I suspect there will always be AM, there will always be FM, there will probably be some kind of satellite delivery. But once the technology is able to deliver the internet to a car or to a person without having to catch up and stream, you can just turn it on and hear it, and it's only a few years down the road, then in every car in America you'll be able to dial up the 300 blues channels that are all over the internet, or the 400 classical channels, or whatever you want. And with the younger generation not in love with radio, didn't grow up with radio, does not have the fantasy or the love affair that you started off the show talking about, they're the future. Those of us sitting here, we may have been in it longer, but we're the dinosaurs. We just don't know that the meteor has hit yet.
There you go.
Well, we don't lay down and die.
No, I didn't say we should, but I'm just saying.
I think you're seeing more and more computers integrating into everyday life. And like Bill mentioned, it'll be a matter of time before it'll be in the cars.
Well, that's what this show is about
there
today, is what is happening to radio. Where is it going? What is radio's future? Bill certainly has seen radio's past, and there was like 2 generations before you, Bill.
Oh, absolutely.
Who actually were the pioneers. We talked to one of them right here, out here in the hall, Arthur Godfrey,
right,
who was one of the very, very first radio DJs in Washington, D.C. in the 1920s, when radio was brand new.
He sang "Happy Birthday" to me on my 6th birthday.
Did he really?
900 years
Did
ago.
he play the ukulele?
No, he didn't. No, he was nice enough. Somehow or other, my parents got hold of him, or the radio station, and told him I was going to have a 6th birthday, and they awakened me so I could listen, because he was on early in the morning. And
my mother told me what those call letters were on that radio, first radio station. He was later on WOL.
well, Arthur Godfrey was on WJSV, which
WJSV, that's it.
was Jesus Saved Virginia. That's what WJSV stood for.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Was it a religious station?
No, those were just the call letters. And WMAL was the M.A. Lease Optical Company. And I don't know what WRC was or any of the others.
I didn't know any of this. Now I see. I grew up with when I was a teenager, the WPGCs. Well, we all know that stood for Prince George's County, right? They had simple things like WVA. Whoa, it didn't take rocket science to figure that out.
WLS in Chicago, world's largest store. WSM Nashville, We Shield Millions. It was owned by an insurance company. One of my all-time favorite up in New York, there was WEVD, that was named after Eugene V. Debs, the socialist.
Yeah.
Well, there was also
Eugene
in
Victor
Chicago,
Debs.
WVON, which is the voice of the Negro, which is one of the
Really?
very first African-American channel stations. And it was a station that eventually one of the Chess brothers bought and owned at one point.
Interesting.
Interesting. Let's talk
It was
about.
omitted from the movie that recently came out about chess, but it's an important part of the chess.
I wrote
record
Kevin
story.
an email, and I said, because Kevin is Phil's son, and I know Kevin. He runs the publishing business, Arc Music, up on Madison Avenue, and I wrote him an email, and I asked him. I said, there's an interesting movie. It basically is concentrating on his uncle Leonard, and as far as the movie's concerned, Leonard never had a brother,
Yeah.
And when I think of chess, I think of Muddy Waters, of course, and I think of Chuck Berry. I think of I think of all of those people they had,
Big
little
names.
Walter, but they called it Cadillac Records because of all these great artists made these guys in this family very, very rich. So rich that they could afford to throw a
give away
Cadillac their
Cadillacs.
way. But, Chuck Berry was a constant seller. I think they overplayed probably the importance of Little Walter. I don't think he was really a huge record seller. But
No,
I'll
he
tell you
wasn't.
who they left out that was. What happened to Bo Diddley in there, man?
Yeah.
I mean, he
Well,
was...
it's a movie. It's a fictional movie. It's not meant to be a documentary. And honestly, it kills me, this argument about, they did this. It's a movie. It's a fictional movie. I think it's most important from where I stand is that there's a generation now of African American and young white kids that love hip hop music that showed up at the movie to see their stars, and they finally heard names from the past. And not all of them, but some of them went back and asked their mom and dads who really was Muddy Waters, who really was Etta James. And so from that perspective, I think the movie's very important. But to get in this argument over it wasn't how close it was to reality, it's a fictional movie. I mean, it's not supposed to be reality. It's supposed to be entertainment. So, but I think it's important because of this turning on a new generation to some people they probably weren't familiar with or just didn't really understand at all.
And you're absolutely right about that. I didn't even think about that. That there were those guys that played those characters. They were rap stars, weren't there? A lot of
They
them.
were.
Beyonce, Def Jam. I mean, these are huge
Because
stars.
when I was in the theater watching it, I was surrounded by a 20-something and younger black people, and I was saying, "Gee, I didn't know nobody had fans this young." I don't think I got it, huh?
As the one who probably made the mistake of alluding to the movie here, just maybe to get back on the track about the radio, I wasn't criticizing the movie at all. I agree with everything Bill said about the movie. I was just tying in a point for the handful of people or whoever watched the show that when they're making a reference to WVON, which was a significant radio station, that was just that it could tie in with something that our viewers here may have seen, i.e. that was the same company that ran Chess Records,
Right.
Yeah.
but in the movie it didn't happen to deal with the radio side. I'm not saying that was a fault of the movie, I was just sort of linking the two. And it actually just to tie in a little bit, because for whatever reason a lot of us are kind of blues, roots music oriented
Yes.
around this table, that was, those of us who cherish that kind of music back in the day, there were stations like that in certain markets that were very influential in getting the music out there, the rhythm and blues out there, and initially to a black audience, and later white kids started listening to the black stations, and then a few white DJs like Alan Freed started playing the black music for the white kids as well as the, and so on. So that's another reason that I think radio is near and dear to some of our hearts who are around the table. Now, as Bill was pointing out. I mean, the future's a whole different ballgame, and definitely the kids today, the same creative kids that are looking for something different, right? They're definitely looking at their, they're doing stuff on the computer much more than trying to tune in late at night to some radio station to hear the latest sounds. And if they did, they wouldn't hear the latest sounds, so it wouldn't make sense.
Well, I think what makes the internet and satellite different is the fact that you can broadcast out to such a wide audience, and not just within your town.
Well, like your friend that lives in France.
Yeah, I've even got listeners in France before they'll come in and listen to the show.
Right, now the time difference is a problem, but
Well, yeah, and the other thing is that, for instance, for me in satellite radio, I do the blues channel. In any single market, you could probably make a case there may not be enough listeners, blues fans, in a single market to support a 24-hour-a-day radio station. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's the argument that gets made. But once you add the whole country together, and so all these little pockets are now one community because you can get to the whole country, then there are past the critical mass number of being able to support the radio station, having enough listeners, so it makes a difference and it makes sense to do it. So, and the internet will do that too. AM, FM, those are locked into local communities, which of course, what they can do that I can't, a little harder on the internet, but not impossible, is be important to their local community, be rooted in that local community, be driving their music, promoting the music. And your guys' show, that's what your
That's what we try to
does,
do.
and that makes it very important and very unique.
well, one thing I thought was interesting is a lot of the radio stations now stream directly from the internet. You can get any of the local people. I can call my friends across the country and say, "Oh, you need to listen to so and so," and it's streaming live. Now they may not do it all the time. They may be just certain pockets, but that's going there too.
Most of them are doing it. They also see that the move is, first of all, they have these HD channels now that they're dealing with, which there's no one really haven't talked about that, but that is a factor out there. That's a sort of a byproduct of the FM market now. They have these 5 other channels each station has that are called.
Explain that, please. What is high definition radio?
No, it's not high definition. That's television. But the deal is there are a number of sideband waves and carriers. And so what they've allowed is the FM channels, and I believe even AM has some sideband if they want, to put other channels on there. So that literally WPFW, for instance, if just for example, this is the station that Steve's on now, could put an all blues format on one of their sidebands. Still have the diversity over the air, but on one of their sidebands would be all blues or all jazz or all political talk or whatever it is they wanted. And then if you buy the HD radio, then you can tune in and get those channels, and they have started advertising them, and that's what that's all about. The question's going to be is what programming they're putting on there. And a lot of them have gone to the model of, well, we'll just put on what we already have, but with fewer commercials, thinking that that's the only problem. And really, they still haven't figured out a way of making it successful for themselves to work, because the problem is people don't necessarily want to hear the same 40 songs over and over and over again. And then, whether it's with commercials or without, after about the age of 13, you get tired of the same 40 songs over and over. Now, before 13, I wanted to hear those same 40 tunes also over and over and over again. So that's been a problem for them. With the
Let me ask you, anybody that can answer this question will be fine. Is there any such thing now as that last stronghold, be it AM, FM, or clear channel, as we used to call one of those real strong, get it anywhere in the United States on a good day? Is there any last holdout?
That represents
None,
what we came out of?
None that I know of.
Like,
And there was-
not even the Grand Ole Opry or anything like
There are
that?
54 or 57 radio stations that are heard in the Washington area at the moment, and you see them listed AM and FM. I think it's 54, maybe 57 stations. I don't find, and I know this is selfish of me, but I don't find any music I want to hear.
Yeah,
I grew up in an entirely different world,
and they don't play
artists,
there's
and,
nothing.
and nobody's playing it.
And there's no great make-believe ballroom or,
No.
you know, for people who like a really good straight-ahead big band.
Yeah.
And, you know, or even small hot combo jazz.
I can't find it on any radio station,
No,
and
you're
I've
looking-
tried. I put on scan in my automobile mostly. As a matter of fact, I never listen to the radio at home.
I was just going to ask that. Does anybody here listen to the radio regular
I don't.
music
get-
station for more than 5 minutes?
The only time I do is when the Redskins are playing. I turn off the sound on
You
TV,
can get Sonny and
and,
Sam.
and I like to listen to Sonny and Sam.
We did the same thing.
And I used to love it when there was the three of them, Frank, Sam, and Sonny.
Right, yeah.
But the man that took over the radio station fired Frank Herzog and then took his job.
Right.
Larry Michaels is his name.
Right.
And that just ticked me off enough that, but I like Sam and Sonny.
Well,
They're
you should
fun.
also say, when we say there are 55 or 57 stations in the market, they're basically controlled by 5 companies.
Right,
Channel,
absolutely.
I mean, the thing is, you got to remember is the number of stations are not what's the driving force. The force is who's the ownership of the stations.
Right.
And Clear Channel has 4 or 5 formats that they push out, and they're going to push it out on every one of their stations all across America, which is why stations like Steve, WPFW, the community stations, the little those, are so crucial because they are still committed to playing. There's a hot jazz and the big bands and the blues and whatever. And satellite radio, that's one of the things that we've made successful with is all these niche formats that radio walked away. We have a 40 station. We have a 50 station. That's all they play. 40 station plays nothing after 1949. So you can hear some of those big bands and those
Right.
swing stuff. But again, that's not over-the-air radio, and it's not commercial radio. They are pretty well locked up by 5 or 6 companies that own all the stations across America, by and large.
And what they've done, the format and the programming approach on most of the commercial stations these days is more cookie cutter and in many cases satellite. In other words, it's distributed by satellite, not in the sense of like XM Sirius satellite, but I mean, in other words, nationally produced programming. So, like the era that Bill came out of, and I think the one reason people who grew up in that era had such a fond memory of the stations like WMAL, it wasn't just about the music or any one thing. This was kind of a community station that was there for local news. It might be local chit-chat. Sometimes it wasn't particularly heavy or weighty or substantive, little like the morning chat, just kind of light chat. But if something bad happened, or there was a snowstorm, that would be where you would hear all the local news. And
Which roads were closed and all that stuff.
And you might even have a local arts reporter occasionally come on and plug the latest, theatrical piece. So it did seem like it was kind of a part of the community. And you know what? Akron, Ohio had a station like that too, and so did Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and so did small towns across the country. And that has completely died out now. So that every for example, in let's say a top 40 rock kind of station in the country, you could barely even tell what city you were in terms of how the sound of the and the music selection for that matter tends to be nationally driven. So you don't have those little quirky differences even in the top 40 stations. That in the old days you might have a top 40 rock station in Chicago where 1 or 2 artists broke that weren't breaking in Philadelphia or in L.A. That sort of stuff you don't have now. So there's that national homogeneous. It's all the same.
Yeah, homogenized.
Homogenized, as opposed to being really tied to the local community and local and regional tastes.
Well, you're absolutely right. When I was on the radio, we felt like we needed to serve our particular community with all the information we felt they needed and should have, and that's what we did. We had great news departments at all the radio stations. I mean, tremendous news departments. And each of us on the air was allowed to be himself, which I'm not sure exists anymore in the kind of radio I knew. We were allowed to play what we want, say what we want, interview whomever we wished, and be a part of everything that happened in this city. We talked about the city. And if something bad happened, everything stopped until we got all that information out to the listener.
And you had one really cool thing, especially at night. You had Larry Krebs.
Yeah. Yeah, Larry Krebs was about 4'4" or 5. He knew every policeman and every fireman in Maryland, Virginia, in the district. And Larry was out on the street from 11 at night until 6 in the morning. And while I was on midnight to 6, if anything happened, Larry would call, tell me about it. And when Wilbur Mills took Fanny down to the tidal basin and drove into the water, Larry covered that. And late in Larry's life, Larry Krebs, he felt very badly about that because he thought if he'd have shut up and not done anything about it, but he was a reporter.
It was his job.
And every police department would contact Larry and say, Larry, this is what's going on. Shh, he would be there in a second and kept us informed. And I loved him. He was a neat little guy. And got a lot of people on the air with me for different reasons, you know, police chiefs and firemen and emergency squads, and yeah, good guy.
Well,
And a lot of attorneys, too, you know, running with their,
Yeah.
you know, ambulance chasers, because he was at every big wreck,
Oh yeah.
every
Yeah.
big fire.
Larry covered everything and anything, and he was good at it. And
I think if you grew up with community radio, it's sad to see it go in that sense.
It is, isn't it?
Billy mentioned earlier WPGC. That was an era I grew up as a young boy. You hear the story, and it's true with a lot of people. I had the little red transistor radio that my grandparents bought me one Christmas.
Listening to the good
yeah,
guys.
And I'd get in bed and I'd listen to the Senators baseball game. I'd listen to WPGC, and it was stuff that meant something to me because it was hometown.
Yeah.
And now I think young people they turn on the radio. They don't know where it's coming from. They don't care. I have a young son at home. He sees me going to the TV to see what the weather's going to be, and he's, why are you looking at that? It's weather bug, Dad, on the internet here. That's how you find the weather.
does he have an iPod, your boy?
Yeah,
Of course.
of course.
Of course.
And it's loaded with all types of music that I probably wouldn't enjoy. But
By the way, I have an iPod. I don't use it that much. I have it. I was thrilled to find there's an accessory that you can get. It's a little radio receiver, so I got it. But interestingly, it only has FM. It's a little $30 or so accessory, so I can walk around with the iPod, either listen to my pre-recorded tunes or I can tune in to FM radio. So I guess that's using technology to keep up with the past or something.
well, what I find interesting too is that when you talk about younger people and what they listen to, a lot of the rap nowadays is popular. I know it had been for a while, but I notice as kids get older, reach more adulthood. I've got friends. I have a son ourselves that's 30 years old. As he approached 30, he started coming to me, gee, Pop, you know, what's this Jimi Hendrix guy all about? Or what's this all about? And I've got friends that have older children starting to become, you know, older adults now, and they want to know now all of a sudden about that. And I said, well, maybe that's because there's a real feel to that kind of music that they don't have nowadays. They think they have it, but I don't think it's really there. And I think that when people get old to a certain age, they start to perceive that.
You realize you sound just like your parents.
Yeah, of course.
Because they were saying the same thing. Well, they think that music. You got to feel
my father,
it. But
you mentioned WGAY. He loved the station. Of course, that's what he listened to. In our house, he listened to that. My brother and I are upstairs. We're pounding the rock and roll records. And he's screaming, turn it down. Yeah, it's the same thing.
But I did the same thing, not Jimi Hendrix, but I was asking, when I was your son's age, tell me about Charlie Christian, you know? That's what I wanted to know about, right? You know, and or Les Paul or somebody,
Right.
you know, of that era. You know, being a guitar player or trying to be one at 11 years old, taking guitar lessons from one of the area's greatest jazz guitar players, Frank Mullen.
Yeah.
And that's what I
How
started
competent did you become with the guitar?
What's that now?
How competent did you become playing guitar?
Well, I've played guitar on hundreds and hundreds of commercial recordings, and I play guitar on most of my performances.
I believe he's pulling your leg, Billy.
Well, no, I don't believe so because Bill knows me mostly as a singer and a bass player. Really,
Yeah, that's true.
that's true.
Now, with Danny Gatton, you played bass, right?
Sure did.
Yeah.
I sure did. I
Those were
played
days, huh?
bass
In
with
Fat
Danny
Boys?
Gat.
Used to have a jazz festival down in Crystal City. And,
I just sang for that.
and Billy would come down there and entertain and sing. Very entertaining.
Absolutely.
Great talent.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that because you have $1,000 check for me or anything like that.
Bill
You got
mentioned-
$1,000?
That's what I'm
Now, you know, it's funny, but my radio is my television. Well, you know, because, you got like, 350 channels. Most of them are home shopping, but, you know, when you get up in those stations, you got all of these stations that say ballads and singers. Big band, you got 3 or 4 of them. And then you've got pure pop of the 50s, pure pop of the 40s. You got blues stations. You got about 5 or 6 blues stations.
You're talking about those audio channels that are on the cable.
That's
Yeah,
correct. That's what I use as
Yeah,
radio.
yeah. Well, Vicky's parents just bought a big screen TV. They've been wanting one for a long time.
Finally.
And they've got high definition. They got the cable. They got everything hooked up. And I went out and was showing her dad how certain features worked, and it's all new to him. And as soon as I showed him these radio station type things that were playing, he thought that was the greatest thing. And they got the big band, the swing. That's what he grew up
I don't
on.
think they've turned that off yet, have
No,
they,
and
Tim?
I love that.
He's basically hadn't watched his big screen TV. He's listening to the.
And it has a little panel up there, and it tells you about it.
You're right.
Tells you sometimes who all the sidemen are.
right.
Interesting
Yeah,
facts.
and interesting facts about surrounding the
Yes, it's
the
nice.
I
artist.
believe that's Music Choice.
Yes.
Is that company, as a matter of fact. And XM Sirius is also on a couple of the cable companies.
Yes.
And on DirecTV, delivering the same channels, but they're on television as well as on
But
satellite.
Bill, you had mentioned earlier, got me to thinking when you say like radio stations will play the same 40 songs over and over.
The top 40.
Yeah. Well, I've often wondered why. For example, they'll play Eric Clapton, Layla. Now, let's say Eric Clapton has just released a new album. It's a good album, but they won't play anything off of that. And I've often wondered, is it
Why
just the
is that?
song that they're playing, or you think they play Layla and said, "Here, Eric Clapton, brand new song," but they don't touch any of the new stuff by a lot of these classic artists, classic rock. They won't play any of the new stuff in these guys. And I've often wondered, what's their philosophy?
That's because of what their flawed, I call it flawed research. They would say not. They would say it's direct.
Right.
Their research is telling them exactly to get to the listeners, the age group they want for the demographics they're trying to reach to be able to sell advertising. We should never kid ourselves. In the early days, it was still this way, except that it was so new, they didn't have control over it. So you got to do whatever you wanted. You got to do your own write-ins to commercials or whatever. But radio is really about selling advertising. It's not
Right.
necessarily about playing music. The music is there to sell the ads. Now, it didn't always be quite so heavy that way. But as time's gone on, as someone like Clear Channel has invested billions of dollars buying these channels all across America, they cannot afford, or they don't believe they can afford, to have a channel not deliver X amount of dollars and X amount of listeners.
all
So
about the
their
money.
research says, oh, my oldies audience doesn't care about anything after 1980. We'll never play anything after 1980. It doesn't matter that they love Eric Clapton. That's not what it's about. It's about
They recognize that song.
and this is what I need to keep this audience, according to my research. Now, I think it's flawed. I think there's a lot of flaws in it, but that's the way it is. It's a huge business. It's no longer the local radio station having fun. The idea that Sly Stone, who used to be a DJ, used to do commercials himself, and one of them was for X-Lax, so he used to have a toilet flushing in the bathroom as he read the copy. That would never happen
would not
today.
happen
Those
today,
days
yeah.
are long gone.
Picking up on what Bill said, I think that is an interesting point here for the viewers of this show. If they have any interest in radio, it's kind of a mind-blowing thought, but it is true. In radio, as a business, you, the individual, you think of yourself as the consumer. Wrong. You're the product. You, the listener, are the product. The consumer is the advertising company, the company that's buying the ad. The purpose of radio, and this would also apply to conventional commercial TV as well, is to deliver the product, i.e. the ears and the eyes, and or the eyes, to the customer. The customer is the advertiser. So we out there, being regular folks walking around, don't realize that that is what it
Very
is.
interesting.
But in the business, that is what it is. So that's something to just think about and
That is very
ponder
interesting.
over. That even being said, of course, there's different ways of running a business, and these days they've been running it to that point of like, it's like kind of capitalism goes mad. Like you've had the Wall Street, downfall in the last year or so. You can have businesses where it's kind of a win-win situation for everyone. You can have businesses where someone just keeps getting squeezed and squeezed until eventually it breaks, or the goose that lays the golden egg is strangled.
Right.
And maybe commercial radio's at that point now, but that's exactly it. They want to play
That is
Layla
interesting.
because that will attract you,
Right.
the product, to their customer, who's the advertiser.
I guess if you're going down the dial and you hear Layla, you stop and listen. You hear a brand new song by the same artist, you don't know the
Let's put it
song.
this way: more people will. Some people would stop. Like you might stop, I might stop. But
Right.
more people will stop surefire to Layla. Just like I noticed that at the Five Guys hamburger place, which is very popular. What do you get with your hamburger? They offer French fries. They don't offer a choice of sautéed broccoli and other things. Most people want French fries. Now, again, if you want a really good restaurant, you'd want to offer a little more diversity, but there's a lot of money to be made in just saying, you've got burgers,
You get fries.
we got fries, because most people like fries.
Money. Okay. This radio, this is our future. We're looking at our future over here. Now, how are we eventually going to advertise on that format?
That is interesting because that's now something that's
If
really
this is
up in
what
the
it's
air.
all
Yeah.
about, how you going to do it?
A lot of it now is with the banner
There'll
ads.
be
you see.
pop-ups on the screen of
Yeah.
your computer?
But, pretty much now it's down, just to the banner ads that you see on all internet type advertising. But they do need to think of maybe another way. You could start incorporating, the guy doing the show could say, here, this is the product we're selling. That becomes just like what regular radio is doing. So I think they really need to think of maybe some more creative way to put that advertising out there, so they're not just copying a format.
Okay, we gotta wrap the show up. We covered a lot of territory today about where radio has been. We've gone from Arthur Godfrey to the future, and but I think the main thing is I enjoy radio so much that I was just my closing thoughts on radio period. No matter what your choice of what style you listen to is, I encourage people just to listen to radio for the enjoyment of it. And one of these, what I'm doing right now is something that I always dreamed about doing when I was a kid, and that's imagining what the person you were listening to looked like in person. And you would never
Now
know
we've
that.
blown that.
Oh, you've blown it. So
I apologize.
And Billy, I've always said that I have a face for radio. So
you have. Folks, thank you so much. You've been listening to the American Music Show and watching it. Until the next time, thank you guys. It was wonderful,
Thank you,
wonderful,
Billy.
wonderful.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Excuse
This
me.
is great. This is great.
Thanks.
Bill.